In the year 2000, my father, Neil Barnett, accompanied by his sister Sophie and his cousin Donald, went back to the place where it is believed the family of our Irish ancestor, Jeremiah Barnett, crossed over the St. Lawrence River in the 1850s. It is here in upstate New York that the Barnett's life in America began. My mother, Judith Quinn, was born in Chicago. The Quinn family is also of Irish descent and came to Chicago in the 1860s. We know so little about the generations that have come before us. We made this film so that our parents can take us to the places they have loved and tell us the stories that are important to them. They are the stories that will help us remember who we are and where we came from.
Jeremiah Barnett is considered the founding father of our family. He was born in Ireland in 1809 and emigrated to the United States in approximately 1850. Until recently, we didn't really know where he first lived. We knew it was on Crapser's Island, but we later learned that was changed to a new name of Ogden Island, and sure enough, we did find the place where he first worked. His home was also a mystery as far as I was concerned, but fortunately, when I made contact with my cousin, Dr. Donald Barnett, he did some work and found the location north of Potsdam, and we went and looked at the actual site and found a house there where Jeremiah, we believe, raised his family.
My great-great-grandfather named this town, I think he was a tenant farmer here in 1856, and he named it Fox Hall after the place where he worked in Ireland.
As I stand here and look at this house, it gave me a wonderful connection with northern New York and even Ireland, because at the time of the famine, the Barnett family found residence here, and we all became, I guess you'd say, we all became Americans. I was born in Potsdam, New York, which is a small town up in northern New York near the St. Lawrence River, Canadian border. And my father was one of the few town physicians there. His father had been a town physician, and so he followed in that career path. After medical school, my father joined the Red Cross with some friends from medical school, and they went to Serbia and Poland. This is a photograph taken of Theodore with one of his doctor friends when he had just joined the Red Cross and they were over in Europe. He refers in one of his letters to the fact that when they first got to Serbia, they had to fight off the dogs. There were so many of them. Everybody seemed to have dogs. There were thousands of them, and so they had to get these canes just to be able to go for a walk at night. While my father was in Poland, he helped set up nursing training, and met his first wife, Zosia. Zosia, of course, is the mother of my two older sisters, Sophie and Adele. Following his experience in Europe and the Red Cross, my father then went to New York and studied surgery as a resident for about 3 years, and returned to Potsdam in 1924. He 2 years later married Zosia Komorska, the nurse that he had met in Poland. She actually followed him to the U.S. She later admitted she actually was working as helping start a nursing program, and she had reason to go to Toronto, which is where they were married. It had a sad ending because she only lived for 4 years after they were married and died, I believe, of pneumonia. He then was a widower for a couple of years until my mother showed up. She was born in California. This is my mother, Isabel Hayes Barnett. As you can see, she was a beautiful young woman when she graduated from Berkeley High School in 1918. My mother's father, Charles Luke Hayes, was born in Potsdam. His father, I believe, came over from Ireland as well. He was teaching school in Potsdam and received a letter from his brother who asked him to come out and work with him in the mines. And so he somehow got all the way to California and worked in Bodie and a number of other towns in California and Nevada. There were 10,000 people in Bodie at one point in time when they were pulling gold out of the hills. Living in Bodie in those days, and I believe in many of the towns in that part of California and Nevada, approached true lawlessness. The number of murders that happened there in a year was just astounding. People were jumping claims. There were lots of fights which usually were, many times were resolved with gunfight about who owned what claim. While living in those days in that part of the world, I'm sure was involved in gunfights. In fact, one time was shot himself. He studied the law with an attorney and read the law, as they called it, and eventually passed the bar and was a justice of the peace and then elected district attorney. My mother met Theodore when her mother became ill while they were in Potsdam, and Dr. Barnett was called to treat her mother. He was standing talking to her and had his hand on the bedpost, and my mother often referred to the fact that that was very attractive to her because he had beautiful hands, which made sense if you were going to be a surgeon, that you needed those kind of hands to do your work. They were married about a year later, and in those days that was scandalous, and my mother took a lot of grief from people in this small town about how could she dare marry this man whose wife had died such a short time ago. Well, I'm glad she did, and she certainly was glad she did, because she always described their years together as paradise.
The significance of this house was, it was such a happy house to grow up in. My father was open to the world. He always, dinner time was a joy. He'd teach us things. We had sandboxes, and we had a swing here that you could fly on, and a playhouse that we could play in. It was just wonderful. And he had the first garage door opener of anybody I ever knew. My mother lost her first child because she was my stepmother. And that was such a sad thing for me because I love babies. So when Neil was born, I was beside myself. I was so excited to have a baby brother, and so was my father. And one of the things he did when Neil turned 2 was he took him to a bar, because that was part of the social atmosphere in those days. It was right after the Prohibition had been repealed, and sat him on one of the stools and ordered him a little soda in a little shot glass, and that was the first drink he ever had at a bar. That's the kind of thing he'd do.
I guess that's why we were so enamored of the pubs in Ireland.
That might be.
Yeah. I would have been 2 on September 22nd, and he died November
29th.
29th, yeah.
So it was very soon afterwards. He never talked about things, unhappy things. It was always the joy of the morning or the joy of the day. He had a beautiful tenor voice. And he'd get up in the morning and walk down the hall, peek in at Adele and I, and say, "Good morning," and then he'd go in the shower and he'd sing things like an aria from an opera, or...
You said On the Road to Mandalay.
Road to Mandalay was one of the favorites. And I just always wished that somebody had recorded his voice, but they didn't do that then. I think when death is so sudden, you never let go of that person. It's like they're always with you.
Yeah.
And he got sick on Saturday and was dead by Sunday night. I still remember kneeling by the bed praying, "Please, God, don't let him die." And I could hear them taking him out on the stretcher, and part of me wanted to run out and say, hug him, and then part of me was afraid.
My mother used to tell the story that he self-diagnosed, probably very accurately, that he was in bad shape, and I don't know what he told her, but when he headed off for the hospital, she was not real optimistic, and he knew that he was going to need surgery right away. So she could see the operating room, the lights in the operating room from I guess probably the second floor here.
Probably would be there.
And when they didn't stay on very long, she knew that it was bad news.
My mother, I can't ever remember her being morose or sad about my father. When we would have family celebrations, she would often say, "Oh, would that be neat if he were here?" But it was never in a downer kind of an atmosphere. It was always a wonderful, upbeat conversation we would have about how proud Thode, which is what my mother called my father, would have been if he'd been here. When my father died and my mother brought us to Rochester, her brother, my Uncle Emmett, and his wife, Aunt Marge, adopted us almost immediately, ultimately moved in next door to them, and we became one big family. My Uncle Emmett was actually the epitome of someone you could look up to. He was not afraid to discipline us if we needed it. He was quick to praise us when that was appropriate. And frankly, he was the most gracious person you could possibly be when it came to adopting us all as his children. He was in every way a stand-in for my father. His wife, Aunt Marge, was equally beneficent because she could have just said, "Wait a minute, I've got my own family to raise," but she never did. We spent, I would say, at least 60% of our time in their home because we thought of it as our own. My mother went back to get her master's degree so that she could earn a decent living to support us all. In the meantime, my uncle and aunt helped raise us. And ultimately, they all started a restaurant where we all worked. It was called the Ridge Shamrock, named after a small ice cream stand that my mother had operated when she grew up in Bridgeport, California.
The tree that still exists, I was surprised to find it here. I thought that with the highway widening and so forth that it would not have survived, but it did. That's where we'd play hide and go seek. The person who was it had to stand by that tree with their eyes covered while we all went and hid. And of course, we had an enormous number of places to hide because we had this huge farm behind us, and we used to have to put rules on how far you could go because otherwise a person would never find you. Well, the road has gotten dramatically wider. It's at least double. There were no curbs and no sidewalks. The land behind our house all the way to the lake was farmland and park. Now, of course, it's all subdivisions. But we used to be able to walk the 2 miles through the fields, over the streams. It was an absolute idyllic place to grow up.
Chicago, Chicago, that toddling town. Chicago, Chicago, I will show you around. I love it, bet your bottom dollar you lose the blues in Chicago, Chicago, the town that Billy
5210, there it is. Looks pretty darn good.
Not much has really changed, actually. In
No,
this
remember
house or
that-
in the whole block?
That was my bedroom, and that was Nana's room, and that was the living room. This is 5210 Greenwood. This is where my parents and my brother My grandmother wasn't living with us then, but she did shortly after. They moved here in 1938, and we lived here until 1945, right after the war was over. And this house was rented to my parents. I think they paid something like $65 a month. We spent almost 10 years here, so most of my childhood, my first memories were here in this house. Our Christmases and birthday events I remember in this location. What a really happy childhood here, I think, except for the war years. Vivid memory for us was living here at the start of the Second World War, December 7th, 1941. And we were in that front room there reading the newspaper, and my dad was sitting there listening to the radio, and he was just alarmed, and he ran in. My mother and father were talking, and we realized, something terrible had happened, and I soon realized that was the start of war, and they explained to us what was going on. It changed our lives for a long time. We were little kids, and for us it was kind of exciting, I think, to see people in their uniforms, and there was something a little bit exciting about it for us.
There were probably 10 or 12 houses of the 20 that had boys that were in the service.
That's
so
right.
That was pretty exciting to see them come home and come back and
in their
forth.
uniform.
And
but
it was a very quaint and quiet neighborhood. It was
everybody knew each other. Families would sit out on their porches after supper, and kids would play on the sidewalk. We'd be running around and playing together. Our parents were Virginia Wood Quinn, and my dad was John Quinn, who was known as Jack.
They met at Holy Angels, which would be about 20 blocks from here. They met in grammar school, and
they did, first grade.
Then they separated. They lost track of one another through high school, and then came together shortly thereafter.
They didn't marry till they were about 25, I guess it was, and 26. Dad was a year older. And my brother was born 4 years later, and then I was born 3 years after that. But both of their parents were from Chicago. My mother, she was a descendant of the Mayflower, so she met my father, the Irishman. So I have the English and the Irish background. My mother was the middle of 3 daughters. My Aunt Estelle was her older sister. My mother, Virginia, and then 7 years later, her sister, Vivian. And her father was born in Chicago. Her mother was born in Philadelphia, orphaned, and raised in New York City by aunties, where she learned the sewing, and she made her living as a seamstress, doing very fine dressmaking. Our grandmother lived with us from the time I was 18 months old till I guess I was 13 when she died, and that was in Oak Park. So I got to know her very well. I'm only sorry I didn't ask her more questions about her background. One of those things you regret in life, but I'd say my father was kind of a typical Irishman in some ways. Grandchildren of Irish immigrants. And great sense of humor.
Very sentimental.
Very sentimental. My grandmother used to say his bladder was too
connected
close
to his tear ducts.
It was easy to cry, sort of like Neil. But easygoing man, good father, and certainly a good provider.
Mother was very capable. She'd been a secretary to the president of the North Shore Railroad.
That's right.
And she'd done a lot of work in their advertising department. And she was a natural leader. She was president of the Mothers Club in our grammar school, both of our high schools, and my college. She just always seemed to gravitate to a leadership role.
She was a very talented woman, and helped my father in his business in lots of ways with taste and decorating and so forth. This little house was beautifully done. They weren't wealthy people, but it was very attractive. And unfortunately, my father died prematurely, I would say, at age 59. He only really knew 2 of his grandchildren. your son David and our son Ted. And he was crazy about his grandchildren, so he sure would have been excited to know the rest of them. Well, this is where we went to school. I guess I started kindergarten. What year would that have been? I don't know.
Probably 1941 or 2. You were
41
5
or
years
2.
old.
Yeah. And you were already in.
I was here. I
third grade then.
Yeah, you left in 4th, and I was just starting 7th.
Right. I suppose the grounding that I got here as a little kid, in those days, the catechism when you're a little child, that was a big part of learning your faith, and it was a lot of memorizing. But, through the years, of course, I've always been interested in theology and studied it just because I enjoyed it. And it's ongoing. I still read that kind of stuff. And I attribute it to the good teaching I had as a young girl in grade school, and also I went to a Catholic college for a couple of years, so I had some good grounding in theology and sacred scripture and history of religion. So it's always stayed with me, and it's more or less a hobby nowadays in my life. And it helped me raise my kids, and that's what it's all about, I guess. Religion for everybody and everybody's faith. That's really what you want, is how you live your life. That's how it works for me. A great deal of what religion is not just how you live your life, but how you treat other people. So that's pretty much what we learn in our basics, morality. It's kind of hard to see what's happened in some of it nowadays, but in the culture that we live in. But we at least had a good start in life. I hope my kids did too. And I think they have a good sense of the right and wrong and how to treat the world, at least from what I've observed in their lives. We met at a party. You were introduced to me, and I was standing there. I remember looking up at you and thinking, God, that's a nice face. I like that face.
I was sitting on a sofa, I remember that part, and you were on the other side of the room.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I don't know if you remember whether you were talking to people or what was going on, but I picked you out as being cute, I guess was the right word, and so I decided it was somebody I needed to go talk to.
You did. You came across the room, made the move, the first move.
I remember after we talked and everything else, and I figured, hey, I've got to get to know her better, so I think I'll offer a ride home. But I had already offered somebody else a ride home who wasn't as cute.
You were covering all the angles.
Right,
huh?
right.
Yeah.
One of the things I always remember about our courting was you were always somebody who was easy to talk to. I've had a photograph somebody had taken where you were talking to me on one of those phone calls.
Yeah, I had my feet on the wall.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think our first kiss was about the third date.
Probably was, because you never made a move on anybody until you'd have 3 dates.
Not very forward.
You know that was.
I'd learned my way.
That's right.
And I think we were at the top of the stairs in front of
my apartment.
In front of your apartment.
Yeah, in front of the door.
Right.
Yep.
It was great.
It was great.
I
never forgot it.
I almost flew home.
Did you?
I remember I was on I was on a cloud walking over to the bus. It wasn't a sis boom ba thing for me at all. It seemed so natural and comfortable and exciting at the same time to know that I would call Judy and then say, yeah, let's go out this weekend, and we always had a good time, and it was so easy to call and say, let's do it again.
Yeah. We had 4 boys. Ted is the oldest, and he's 37, and Jonathan is the 35. And Christopher is 32, and Mark will be 30, so they'll all be in their 30s soon. It's hard to believe sometimes, but, you know, suddenly they are getting there. They were all born in a different state. Ted was born in California, John was born in Boston, and Chris was born in Augusta, Georgia, and Mark was born in Cincinnati. Those were crazy times. Seemed like I was either had a new baby or was pregnant when we moved, so we got to Cincinnati and decided we'd stop moving, so maybe we wouldn't have any more babies now.
People often ask you, what's it like having 4 boys? And what's your normal answer?
It's great. It was wonderful.
You don't remember it as being something...
I didn't. There was many times when I was going through it, I was tearing my hair out, but having had a lot of friends who had daughters, I have to say, I used to say, you know, boys are very forgiving. I could lose my temper and really be angry and just blow up at them for one thing or another, and 10 minutes later they'd say, "What's for dinner, Mom?"
I've had folks ask me, how do you keep a marriage whole and exciting after 37 years? I think a lot of it has to do with making sure that you are compatible, have same interests and respect for one another.
Oh, for sure.
One of the things that's always been amazing to me is that we don't really fight very often. I mean, that isn't to say that you don't tell somebody
what you think
and what's bothering you.
No.
I think we've always been able to get those things out in the open. And I think the other part of it is that we both saw our roles as being pretty darn important. It wasn't, you're living for me or vice versa. I think we both saw ourselves as living for our family, our boys, and my part of that was trying to be a good dad, but also making a living so we could make ends meet. Yours was...
Well, I think our deal was I would take care of the family, raise the children, do the house, and make us a comfortable home, and you provided it.
I hope that they never have any of the downers like we had when I discovered your affair.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that was a tough time, but, you were such a soldier through that. I have to...
What was I going to do?
I know, but it's it's over, of course.
Well, you said so I have to trust you.
Yeah, well, it's just one of those things. I don't know. I never thought it happened to me, somehow. But I appreciate how you handled it.
Yeah.
To that? Yeah, that'd be great. I've been painting in oil since I was about 12 years old. My parents gave me some oil paints, and I started out just experimenting with them, and I had a little studio in the attic of our house in Oak Park, and go up and paint scenes, and I had a lot to learn, and then consequently had a lot to unlearn when I really went to art school, but at least I learned a lot about the process, and I've always been interested in painting and drawing since I was really a little tiny kid. It's just one of those things I guess you're born with, and my mother and her sisters were all very talented in drawing, and so my mom really taught me the first rudiments of drawing. And I used to just entertain myself on rainy days, painting or drawing, mostly at that age. And then when I was in high school, I was able to really take some art lessons. I was old enough to be able to travel downtown, and we lived in Oak Park, and I would take the L downtown to the American Academy of Art, took Saturday classes, drawing, and so it's always been part of my life since those years. Well, I'm painting a scene from Sonoma, painting Amy and Olivia, and it was a a moment that was so sweet. I happened to have a camera handy and caught them. Olivia was playing with some water, and she was very concerned about a little bug that was in the little frisbee that she had. So she was sort of playing nurse, and it was just a sweet little moment. There were a lot of artists in my family. My own grandfather was. He unfortunately never put it to good means, but his brother, his younger brother, Paul Wood, was a real prodigy, and had he lived, she would have been a famous painter, but unfortunately died at the age of 20, but he accomplished so much in the short life that he had. Painted many portraits that are hanging at Notre Dame University. He did the painting that commemorating the moment when Father Corby gave absolution to the Irish Brigade preceding the battle in the Civil War, where many of them died. My father was an artist in his way. Of course, my interest in it comes from my mother's family, but my father was an interior designer, which, if you knew his background, would seem sort of extraordinary, because he really had no artistic background in terms of his parents. He didn't even really know his father. Died when he was very young, and his mother was hardworking. Really, no time for that sort of thing, I'm sure. Well, I guess I've been fortunate to be married to someone who could support me while I played around with art for many years, as well as raised a family. It allowed me the freedom to, when I had time between child raising and rearing, to pursue my interest and keep my hand in it, so to speak. You have to keep working. You never sit back and say, oh boy, I'm so great, this is just wonderful. Just you always think to yourself, the next painting is going to be the really great one. And so it's always a learning process for me anyhow.
Sailing has been an important part of our family life, and it all began here on Arundecoit Bay at the Newport Yacht Club. My uncle brought me here when I was about 12 years of age and introduced me to someone who agreed to teach me how to sail in a lightning.
After I learned to sail at Newport, everywhere we went, we found some way to have a boat and take the boys sailing when we could. Judy certainly went sailing with me a lot.
Neil brought sailing into my life because I didn't grow up on sailboats or know any much about it. Early on, when we could afford it, he bought a Sunfish. We belonged to a little sailing club down in Georgia, and Neil would race. And the kids were little, and we'd go out for the Sunday afternoon, and we'd take the kids, and they'd play in the water, and then they would see him sailing and just become engrossed with that. And then when they were old enough, we got our own sailboats for the little kids, and they learned sailing, and our Sundays were spent going to Cowan Lake.
The family continued to have lots of interest in sailing, racing small boats, and of course a lot of our family vacations were trips to the Caribbean or Bahamas to have all 6 of us sail together and spend a wonderful time together. As we aged, of course, sailing became a little bit less feasible for Judy and me, and so we've moved into a powerboat. But the boys all still take part in sailing. Ted in San Francisco and Chris and John here in Seattle. There's something about sailing, and I hope that the boys stay with it as they raise their families.
Go out a little further, maybe.
Well, the ideal thing about Bainbridge Island for us is the fact that it's close, but it's not too close. Our children, 2 boys, John and Chris, who live in Seattle, I don't think feel like we're camping over them. I mean, it takes an effort for us to come, and we don't always stop in to see them every time we go over there. They choose to come over here when they want to, and I think really enjoy the fact that it's very pastoral and there's places to hike, and it's very different. And of course, with the boat, we can take advantage of the water. That's what we really love. We've gone over to Bell Harbor Marina, which is right near Pike Street Market, and you can rent the dock there for the night and spend the night there and use the city. And of course, the activity with the ferries has never been a problem, and you would think it would be noisy and so forth, but it's almost always this peaceful here.
At this point in our lives, I just hope we have good health and able to travel. We've been trying to get a lot of that in the last few years, make some more trips to Europe, and love to go to the Orient and go to Japan. And really, we have a lot of fun traveling with the kids, either renting houses somewhere and then having them join us. Trying to think of maybe doing that in Italy and having the kids join us, and that's really a kick. And something like that is probably the best way to enjoy being with the family. Hey, hi Willa. Hi Willa. Hi honey.
My wish for my grandchildren and their grandchildren is that they could have as wonderful a life and as much respect for one another as we have, and we have for our children and grandchildren. Every moment that we think about getting together with them is exciting, and we look forward to it. As you get older, I think you have to you live from what's coming up. One of the nice things about retirement, as far as I'm concerned, is to be able to contemplate, what are the highs that are coming. And fortunately for us, there haven't been that many lows. So in all honesty, maybe that's another wish that I would have, is that they could have good health, and we sure have had that. I think the major thing that I would wish for them is that they can respect one another and enjoy their company.
Well, we seem to have a good time when we get together, and so there's always a lot of laughter and fun and
it's wonderful.
kidding one another, and I guess sense of humor through your life is certainly a great ingredient. And somehow we've been able to see that with all our kids and just enjoy each other's company.
And they respect one another, and I think look to one another for advice and counsel, and I find that to be
that's fun. I love it.
Wonderful, and I would wish that for our grandchildren, that they can have that good fortune. The other thing is your work has to be something that really excites you and you're enthusiastic about. If you don't really look forward to getting up in the morning to go do whatever it is you've chosen to do, you can't make enough money to make that worthwhile. And fortunately, so far the boys have been able to find things like that.
It can't be too far here, does it?
Are we about halfway? No, we're not halfway.
Or that
yet.
one, huh?
We're not halfway yet. There's a Barnett there. That's a Barnett. Here's another one. Catherine Barnett, 1890, 1925. Ah, success. So if you found it, huh? This is the Jeremiah one, so?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, that's one I remember.
There he is. He's still alive.
Yeah. Our life came out extremely well because you picked the right woman. You provided a wonderful memory that all of us have looked back on. I'd like to believe we've done the same for our boys. And I know that the fact that Ted was willing to do this kind of making it hard for me to talk, but it also confirmed that fact that he thought it was worth capturing. And to those who haven't come yet, either granddaughters or grandsons, I say I hope someday that you'll have a chance to look at this film and see that we cared about you. As I know from being here and with my sister and my cousin and hearing them tell about, what the life of my grandparents and my dad and mom were all about, they really cared about us. And I hope they'll take the time, they, our grandchildren, to carry on this heritage and do something similar. I think my father's legacy, and one that we've tried to carry on, is that family is really, really important. And if you're going to spend your time in the world, you've got to earn a living and to provide capital things for your children, but much more important, you have to provide a philosophy of life and an interest in them. And I know from conversations with my mother and anybody who had a chance to talk about it, that's exactly where my father was, and my mother certainly was, my uncle was. So we've tried to do the same thing. I've said many, many times, given a choice, I'll spend time with the children over almost anything else. I really wish Ted had been here with us, and hopefully we've captured it so he can understand why I'm saying that. And I sure thank him for what he did to come up with the idea in the first place, and then the support that we've all had doing it. It's been wonderful fun. It's been as you can tell by my wet eyes, it's been a kind of as you can tell by my reactions right now, it's been a very emotional adventure.